It is now under Labor Green stewardship.
Order. Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. As the nation knows, Western Australia has a historic Senate election underway. It is an unprecedented event in our nation's political history. I'm very pleased to be a candidate, proud to be a West Australian Labor senator, here to stand up for my home state, a place that I have grown up in and lived in all my life. It's an election that gives Western Australia a chance to send a strong message to Prime Minister Tony Abbott and Premier Colin Barnett, a message that West Australians will not stand for their broken promises. With the mining boom slowing, Abbott and Barnett governments should be investing in Western Australia to build more rail, road and energy infrastructure, not cutting jobs and services like they are doing. WA is already paying more than we're already paying our fair share, and the people of my great home state should not have to put up with two Liberal governments breaking their promises and commitments. This election can't change the government, but it is a very real opportunity to vote for a Senate that can hold Prime Minister Tony Abbott and his government to account. Prime Minister Tony Abbott told his supporters he wanted to model his government on the Barnett government, and he has been true to his word. Premier Colin Barnett and Prime Minister Tony Abbott have both proven their governments cannot be trusted. Prime Minister and Tony Abbott told the Australian people one thing before the election and have been doing the complete opposite in power, a trail of broken promises that will hurt WA families, and as we know, the federal budget looms, there will be more pain in store for Western Australia. Prime Minister Abbott promised no cuts to health, no cuts to education and that pensions wouldn't change. And now, as we know, all areas of expenditure are under review. The Abbott government has shown no respect for the promises it made to West Australians, including on schools, the NBN, debt, Medicare and maintaining Medicare locals. Let's look at the promises, for example, made to West Australian schools and to students. Labor stands for a fully funded education system. In the election, Prime Minister Abbott and Christopher Pyne promised to support Labor's education funding reform. Our Better Schools funding model would have guaranteed fair school funding into the future for WA schools. Our plan would have seen schools about $1 billion better off. But devastatingly for WA schools, we now know they weren't really committed. His government wasn't even 2 months old before they abandoned their commitment. Now, Premier Barnett, he has ripped out $183 million out of our schools, and Abbott has committed a measly 120.
Order. I remind you to use the Prime Minister's
Sorry, the Abbott
time.
government has committed a measly $120 million to Western Australia over 4 years. It is a massive broken promise. WA public schools will now receive $91 million less than they would have under federal Labor. Every school in Western Australia is worse off. And if Abbott did not abandon the Gonski reforms, if Prime Minister Abbott did not abandon the Gonski reforms, Premier Barnett would not have been able to make these cuts. The leverage the Commonwealth had on Premier Colin Barnett to lift his game and do the right thing by WA students has been ripped away by Minister Pyne. I want to turn to the broken promises made to the people of Western Australia on health. We know that Labor stands for fair, universal health care, where the access to health services does not depend on the size of your wallet. This is not something that Prime Minister Abbott believes in. Prime Minister Abbott has proposed a great big GP tax, a tax on families, on people every time they visit the doctor, a tax that means families who access bulk billing will have to pay, a tax on families who are already struggling with Western Australia's high cost of living when they can't get into a bulk billing GP will also have to pay. I don't have time to outline today, but there are massive cuts to health at a state level also. We know that the Abbott government's review of Medicare locals could also lead to a massive loss of local services. It shows, I think, how little the Coalition care about well-run, affordable, accountable and innovative health services. And it's not only health and education that the Coalition has attacked. It is our environmental values that West Australians hold dear. We stand for protecting our environment for future generations, for getting that balance right, recognising there's no point in a strong economy if we destroy all that makes life in Western Australia unique. Through changes to the EPBC Act, they want to dismantle environmental protections for our state. They've also suspended the implementation of marine parks and are in lockstep with Colin Barnett in support for a dreadful shark culling program. And I certainly don't trust Prime Minister Tony Abbott to weigh into forestry debates in Western Australia. All hell would break loose. The Abbott government's ideological attack on Australia's renewable energy sector and carbon pricing mechanism put priority on politics over the well-being of our environment, citizens and the economy. Because of climate change, West Australians in the southwest will face decades of rising temperatures. We have committed to scrapping the carbon tax, but it is immoral and irresponsible to dismantle the tools that we need to tackle climate change, and Labor will not stand with this. Speaking of broken promises and policy failure, under Colin Barnett, Premier Colin Barnett and Prime Minister Tony Abbott, we're seeing major infrastructure projects being delayed, cut and cancelled right around WA, creating economic problems and a big flood of broken promises. The state Liberals promised fully funded, fully costed projects like Max Light Rail, Airport Rail and the Perth to Darwin Highway, and they have all turned out to be hollow rhetoric. Indeed, Max Light Rail was a promise made using federal government money Prime Minister Abbott refused to commit. What the Abbott government did was rip $500 million already allocated by federal Labor for public transport infrastructure for WA and ripped it away. All the while, congestion in Western Australia continues to grow. And Premier Barnett did not say a single thing about that money being ripped out of Western Australia. The truth is, public transport is just not in the Liberals' DNA. We know the national broadband network has been cut down to a slower, second-rate service that will hold West Australians back from the industries and jobs from the future. Homes right around the state will be without the NBN connection they otherwise would have had. It is an appalling state of affairs, and I will be working to let West Australians know that Labor stands for investment in public infrastructure that supports productivity and growth in WA. Such infrastructure is vitally important to West Australian jobs, and I've got no doubt that jobs will be one of the most important issues at this Senate election. You know, it is a devastating thing this week with the government's failure to stand up for Qantas. Qantas is vital to Western Australia's link to Asia and our regions. We're also concerned in WA about the blatant attacks of the government on wages and conditions and your refusal to stand up for Aussie jobs. And unlike the Coalition, we know we need to prioritise local employment over and above the bringing in of foreign workers. We must prioritise training of young workers rather than the importation of foreign labour. Mr Acting Deputy President, I would like to have more time today to talk to the Senate about the significant issues at this election. With the mining boom slowing, if there's anything the last few months of the Abbott government have taught West Australians, it is that only Labor will stand up for WA jobs and keep those jobs in our state rather than having them go offshore. As a proud Labor senator and part of the Labor team, we will be here to hold Prime Minister Tony Abbott to account by standing up for Western Australia at this election and for the next 6 years in the Senate. Thank you, Mr. President.